Hi everyone, I'm Pranamya and welcome back to Pages of the Globe. Today we're going to be reading Binnacle Boy by Paul Fleishman. Now this story is extremely interesting and it is one of my favorite short stories. It's set in the seaside town of New Bethany, Maine, and it's the story of a ship called Orion that returns to port with the crew dead and no one knows how they've died. Because everyone who was on that ship died, so there's no witness. The only person who saw anything wasn't even a person. They were a statue, a wooden statue, that looked like a Binnacle Boy. So, that's where the story gets its name. And basically, the Binnacle Boy is a very important part of this story. The main character in the story is Miss Evangeline Fry, whose adopted son was on the Orion. Miss Fry has a new maid called Tekoa, who is completely deaf and can't hear people, but she looks at what they're saying, and she can basically just lip read. And this skill is very useful at one point in the story. Now, I don't want to include too much, so I'm going to move on to the facts. Paul Fleishman was born in 1952 and grew up in Santa Monica, California. He is a novelist and poet. His dad, Sid Fleishman, is also a children's book author, and you might have heard of him. He went to college at University of California, Berkeley. Paul Fleishman is a Newbery Award-winning author of books for young children and adults. He has written about 14 picture books for kids. He has written a collection of 3 supernatural-themed stories that all revolve around statues. Binnacle Boy is the first one. He wrote a poetry book called Joyful Noise, Poems for Two Voices, which won the Newbery Medal in 1989. Paul Fleishman published his first book, The Birthday Tree, a picture book, in 1979. His second book, The Half a Moon Inn, which was published in 1980, was chosen by the Societies of Children's Book Writers as a Golden Kite Honor Book. He blends musical language with quirky looks at the world, and if you read some of his other books, you'll be able to see that. That's it for the introduction. Let's get on to reading the story. And remember, if you would like to hear another story, make sure to comment down below. And remember to like and subscribe. The Binnacle Boy by Paul Fleishman. When the brig Orion, 3 weeks out from Havana, appeared off her home port of New Bethany, Maine, Miss Evangeline Fry was just parting her bed curtains, formally banishing night. While those who had chanced to spy the sails wondered why the ship hadn't fired a salute, Miss Fry was combing her coarse gray hair. When the Orion drifted unexpectedly about, at last presenting her stern to the harbor, Miss Fry was blowing the hearth fire into being. And while the harbor pilot's drowsy son rowed his father out to ship to return in a frenzy, eyes wide and hands trembling, Miss Fry was stationed at her parlor window, awaiting the sight of Sarah Peel. She peered down the length of Bartholomew Street, straight-spined as a mast, so tall that her gaze was aimed out through the top row of the window panes. Miss Fry eyed the clock on the town hall next door. It was 8:15. The girl was late, and plenty of scrubbing and spinning to be done. She pursed her lips and lowered her eyes, and looked out upon her flower garden. It was nearly Independence Day. Tansy was thriving, pinks were in bloom, marigolds were budding on schedule. But the poppy seeds she'd bought from a rogue of a peddler and gullibly planted with care still hadn't sent up a single shoot, and probably never would, she reflected. In memory, she heard her mother's voice. Girls take after their mothers, Evangeline. Men take after the devil. She regarded the bare stretch of soil below, sneering at this latest confirmation. The door knocker sounded. Miss Fry opened up and was surprised to find not Sarah Peel, but her 10-year-old younger sister, Tekoa. "I've come to do the chores, ma'am." Miss Fry cocked her head. "But where is Sarah?" "In bed, ma'am. Taken ill." The girl spoke softly, tucking a strand of straw blonde hair under her kerchief. "Well then," Miss Fry motioned her in and closed the door behind her. "I suppose you've had practice scouring pewter?" Tekoa stood in the hallway silent. Miss Fry blinked her eyes. Was this some impertinence? Then at once she recalled what Sarah had told her, that the girl had been left deaf by a fever and was able to listen only with her eyes by reading the words on others' lips. Miss Fry passed Tekoa, then turned to face her. "You can begin with the pewter." "Yes, ma'am," said the girl. Miss Fry led her down the hall to the kitchen. "And what manner of illness has seized poor Sarah?" "Her jaws," said Tekoa. "They won't come open." Miss Fry appeared startled. "And when did this happen?" "This morning, just after the news of the Orion." Miss Fry's eyebrows jerked. "The Orion? What news?" "Among the crew of New Bethany boys was Miss Fry's adopted son, Ethan." "She appeared offshore this morning, ma'am," Tekoa calmly replied. At once Miss Fry rushed to the window. All of the crew were found to be dead. Bells were tolled, trunks were opened, and mourning clothes were solemnly exhumed. The crew of the brig Orion was buried, and yet the matter remained unfinished. No evidence of the attack had been found. There was no sign of scurvy, no shortage of food. When the ship was boarded, the crew was discovered to be lying about the decks as if hexed, with no witness to bear the tale of the living. None, that is, except the Binnacle boy. He alone remained standing, the life-sized carving of a sailor boy holding the iron binnacle, the housing for the ship's compass. Straight-backed, sober-lipped, in his jacket and cap, he stood resolutely before the helm, his lacquered eyes shining chicory blue. And after the ship's sails had been furled and her cargo of molasses had been unloaded, the Binnacle boy was laid in a wagon, and like the 17 sailors before him, slowly borne up to the road to the top of the cliff, upon which New Bethany stood. And there, before the town hall, the pinewood statue was mounted, still bearing the ship's compass, a memorial to the Orion's crew. Upon him, the families of the dead gazed for hours, convinced he'd somehow revealed the nature of the catastrophe he'd witnessed. Mothers kept watch on his ruddy lips, expecting each moment to see them move. Fathers stared into his painted eyes, waiting to catch them in the act of blinking. Children cocked their ears to the wind as it moaned eerily over the boy, and believed they heard the sound of his voice. Yet the Binnacle boy clung to his secret. The mystery of the Orion remained, and gradually, as the summer progressed, those who stood and awaited the boy's words were replaced by those who'd come instead to leave him with secrets of their own, knowing his steadfast lips to be sealed. At first, it was the children who took up the practice. After whispering into his chiseled ear, they ran off, or studied his stout-hearted features as if expecting a nod of acknowledgement. Soon their elders took after them, and before long the Binnacle boy became the repository for all that couldn't be safely spoken out loud in New Bethany. Lovers opened their hearts to him. Hurrying figures sought him out in the night. Those who felt their lives running out entrusted him with their final confessions. It was one of these last, a long-winded farmer, who Miss Fry was observing from her parlor one morning, when she noticed 3 women with parasols filing down the walk toward her door. "Tekoa," she addressed her helper, I believe we have some company." The brass door knocker sounded 3 times. Tekoa set down her feather duster, opened the door, and showed into the parlor Miss Bunch, Miss Mayhew, and Miss Stiggins. "Good day to you, Miss Fry," chirped Miss Bunch. Without asking, she plopped herself down on a chair, a trespass that drew a stare from her hostess. Affirming her sovereign powers, Miss Fry regally motioned the others to be seated. "It's been some time since you've been seen," said Miss Bunch, "so we decided to come on our own." She jabbed at the sweat on her brow with a handkerchief, adjusted her bonnet, and opened her fan. "To express our condolences, that is, about your son, Ethan." "Indeed," said Miss Mayhew. "You are very kind," replied Miss Fry. She noted that, like herself, Miss Stiggins was attired in a black morning dress. "I believe that your Ethan and my Gerberome were dear companions," Miss Stiggins spoke up. "Aye, and full of mischief as well." "All boys be apprenticed to the devil," said Miss Fry. Tekoa entered with a pitch of cider. "And tell me, child," Miss Bunch addressed her, "how does your sister Sarah progress?" "She is able to open her mouth, ma'am, and eat, but she's weak still and refuses to speak to a soul." "Truly now," Miss Bunch lamented. "Come, child, sit down and visit with us." Tekoa turned her eyes to her mistress, who was glaring across at Miss Bunch in dismay. "If you're fully caught up with your work," said Miss Fry, "you may take a chair, Tekoa, and join us." The girl found herself in a seat in the corner, and in the midst of the conversation Miss Bunch noticed Tekoa looking out to the window. "What do you see, child?" "Excuse me, ma'am, nothing of importance." "Nothing?" Miss Bunch lowered her voice. "You were eyeing the Binnacle boy, I warrant? Watching the ones that speak in his ear. Same I'd be doing if I knew the trick of reading lips." She glanced at Miss Mayhew, and the two traded smiles. "In truth, I was watching the swallows, ma'am." "Swallows!" Miss Bunch commenced to chuckle. "Any fool can see swallows, child. But perhaps you'd put your eyes to use and tell us what you see spoken into the statue's ear." Miss Mayhew's own dim eyes lit up. "Really," protested Miss Fry, "that's not proper." "Purely to help pass time," said Miss Bunch, "to take our minds from our grief for a spell." Tekoa stared at the woman uneasily. "And naturally," Miss Mayhew piped up, "with the curtains drawn, only she'll know who's speaking." "And she'll not disclose the name," Miss Bunch added. Miss Fry looked over at Miss Stiggins. Both knew that the matter wasn't right, yet they were too curious as to what was said to the Binnacle boy. After all, they themselves wouldn't be eavesdropping, and the name would be a mystery, never to be revealed. "You may humor Miss Bunch's wishes, Tekoa," Miss Fry announced after the deliberation. "Yes, ma'am," said the girl. The curtains were closed, dimming the light. Tekoa reluctantly took up her post, while Miss Bunch and Miss Mayhew looked upon in suspense. The church bell declared it to be 11, then noon. Impatiently, the women fanned themselves, squirming about like children in church. Then suddenly, Tekoa drew back from the window. "Did you spy someone?" Miss Bunch burst out. And suddenly it occurred to her that some sharp-eyed soul might reveal the fact that one of the false teeth she wore had originally belonged to a dog. "Yes, ma'am, I did." Miss Mayhew grinned eagerly. "Well then, and what was spoken, child?" The girl swallowed. "Come on now, speak up. Let us hear it, word for word." "Yes, ma'am." Tekoa lowered her gaze. She studied her hands and breathed in deeply. "I know what killed the Orion's crew." After her 3 visitors had gone and Tekoa had finished her chores and left, Miss Fry climbed to the top of the stairs, and then, as if she hadn't in weeks, turned right. Tekoa's revelation still rang in her head as she walked down the hall, came to a halt, and opened the door to Ethan's room. She stood in the doorway a moment. The room was musty, the light dim. She passed his bed, opened the curtains, and gazed out his window at the indigo sea, musing on all he might have been. Miss Fry turned around. Surveying the cobwebs, she recalled that both of her natural sons had occupied the room as well. But they'd grown up wild and long ago had left, following their father to sea. And like him, gaining a fondness for the rum they freighted across the waters. When the schooner, on which all three had shipped, went down in a gale off the Georgia coast, Miss Fry had neither been surprised or sorry, and had returned with relief to her maiden name. Her mother, herself abandoned by her husband, regarded the sinking as a fitted judgment. Men, she summed up, are a stench in God's nostrils. Miss Fry paced slowly about the room. She found herself staring at Ethan's washstand, recalling the chill October day she'd gone mushroom picking, miles from home, and discovered an infant wrapped in a flour sack, left at crossroads dead. Or so she feared, till she gradually warmed him, holding the bundle next to her skin, and felt him slowly beginning to squirm. Astonished, she hadn't known what to do, until something her mother had long ago told her leaped into memory. If you save a creature's life, Evangeline, you're responsible for its every deed afterward. Unwilling to entrust his raising to another, she bore him home, burnt the flour sack, bathed him thoroughly, and named him Ethan. Miss Fry walked up to his mahogany desk. The lamp by which he worked was dusty. His goose quill pen and his ink bottle awaited. She opened the primer he'd used, and recalled the pleasures of shaping his youthful mind. A freethinker in religious matters, she'd refused to take the child to church, and had taught him a catechism of her own devising. Shunning New Bethany's public school, Miss Fry had been his only tutor as well. She vowed that Ethan would turn out a gentleman, cultured and refined. No weed would be allowed to take root in the boy. No unwanted notion would enter his head. She would tend the child like a seedling tree, encouraging one branch and cutting another, keeping the image of its final shape fixed firmly in her mind. After all, she reasoned, God had meant him to die. By granting him life, she'd assumed his role. The boy was thenceforward her private domain, whose growing body she marveled at, as if it were her own work. Tekoa's words came suddenly into mind, and Miss Fry emerged from her reverie. Tekoa's words came suddenly to mind, and Miss Fry emerged from her reverie. She closed the curtains, shut the door, and marched downstairs to the parlor again. It was dusk. She stood watch on the Binnacle boy, hoping to catch someone seeking his ear, desperate to know whom Tekoa had seen. When the light at last failed, she gave up her vigil and slowly sipped down a bowl of bean soup. She wondered if Tekoa might have made up the message she'd reported, then quickly put the thought out of her head. There wasn't a speck of deceit in the girl, and Miss Fry wondered what Tekoa must think of a mistress who ordered her to eavesdrop. She broke through the crust of an old plum tart and considered the girl's ways. She'd performed her duties competently enough, and yet there was something distant about her. The others had hopped to Miss Fry's commands and striven anxiously to please her. They'd always been afraid of her, as Tekoa's sister Sarah had been. Little wonder, since of all the town Miss Fry alone did not go to church. She rarely went out and was rarely visited. Yet in her presence, quiet Tekoa seemed calmly detached. Hoping to break through the girl's silence and frantic to know whom she'd seen at the statue, she called Tekoa from her work the next morning and set her to watching the Binnacle boy. She felt a need to win the girl to her and hoped she was appreciative of this respite from her chores. Doggedly, she attempted to kindle conversation with the girl in vain. Thereafter, Miss Fry sat in silence, studying Tekoa's pale features, hoping the speaker she'd seen might return. For an hour, Tekoa watched the window, then glanced over to her left. She sighted Miss Bunch and her two companions traveling under the portable shade of their parasols, bustling down the walk. "Dear child, how good to see you," Miss Bunch addressed Tekoa at the door. "And good day to you as well, Miss Fry. As you are no doubt lonely with your dear son, we felt it our solemn duty to lend you our company once again. And while we're here," Miss Mayhew added, while Miss Fry led them into the parlor, we thought Tekoa might be allowed to read out the secret spoken to the statue." "In quest of the truth concerning the Orion," Miss Diggins sternly declared. Miss Fry declined to mention the fact that she'd already had the girl doing just that. Ashamed to engage in the practice so openly, she decided to set Tekoa to spinning, when she glimpsed a woman crossing the street and heading toward the Binnacle boy. "Yes, of course," she stammered. "Why, we owe it to the town." She hurried Tekoa back to her seat. A few minutes later, the girl turned around. "Well?" asked Miss Fry. "Have you something to report?" "Yes, ma'am," the girl gravely replied. Miss Diggins leaned forward. "Let us hear it then, child." Tekoa lowered her eyes in embarrassment. "Miss Pike put no money in the collection plate at church, but only rattled the coins." Miss Bunch and Miss Mayhew gaped at each other. A blush spread over Miss Diggins. "You may return to the window now, Tekoa," Miss Fry informed the girl. In silence, the women fanned themselves. Miss Diggins looked across at Miss Fry. "My dear Jerome always spoke most highly of your Ethan." Miss Fry gazed blankly, lost in thought. "He might have been a scholar, or a poet, perhaps." Slowly, Tekoa drew back from the window. Miss Fry's eyes flashed. "What is it? Something spoken?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well then, speak it out, Tekoa." The girl glanced down at the hardwood floor. "Tonight we meet, under the elm tree." Miss Bunch gasped for breath. "Which elm tree, child?" "Didn't say, ma'am," Tekoa replied. Miss Bunch and Miss Mayhew sighed in union. Again they waited while Tekoa watched. "My Jerome had just turned 14, Miss Diggins said. "And your Ethan?" 14 as well," Miss Fry replied. Miss Diggins released a sigh. An hour passed. The church bell rang 12. Miss Bunch yawned and reached for her parasol. "Perhaps we should go." "Indeed," said Miss Mayhew. Suddenly, Tekoa turned. Her eyes appeared glazed, her features stiff. "What is it?" Miss Fry demanded. "A message?" "Yes, ma'am," the girl reluctantly replied. "Gracious sakes, child, let us hear it then." Tekoa swallowed. She gazed absently before her. One of the tins of tea snuck among the Orion's provisions was poisoned. "Poisoned?" shrieked Miss Diggins. "The tea?" Miss Fry jumped up. "Is there more, Tekoa?" "That's all of it, ma'am." Miss Diggins shot forward. "I insist you reveal the speaker," she cried, taking hold of Tekoa's shoulders. "But, ma'am, the agreement." "She's right," said Miss Bunch. "The name of the speaker must not be revealed." "But my very own Jerome." "Poison. The murderer must be brought to justice. Perhaps, Miss Mayhew said, the speaker is lying. Slowly, Miss Fry paced the room. But why would someone lie to the statue? No reason at all, Miss Dickens snapped. She sat back down and wrung her hands. They must have opened the tea that morning. And Lord knows, Miss Mayhew grimly continued, with all the molasses they sweetened it with, they might have drunk the hemlock itself and not known it. A silence fell over Miss Fry's three visitors. They rose to their feet, bid farewell to Miss Fry, and slowly retraced their steps down the street, avoiding the Binnacle boy's eyes in passing, as if this knower of secrets might discover their own with a glance. Miss Fry did not sleep well that night. The next morning, Tekoa's revelation still rang in her ears. When the girl arrived at 8, Miss Fry set her to mixing up bread dough and stepped outside to the garden. At a deliberate pace she strolled the paths, searching for comfort in the company of flowers. She smiled to see her larkspur thriving and lad's love blooming in its appointed season. She gazed upon her Queen Margats and mint, and sampled the various scents of her roses. Sitting on a bench, she inspected her tansy, eyeing the cornmeal yellow petals, recalling how Ethan too had loved flowers. She grinned to remember the morning they merrily roamed the cliff 2 summers before, collecting posies, and at once the smile left her lips. For that was the day the loquacious Miss Gump had stopped them to chat on their return. The woman's ill-mannered son had appeared, while she jabbered on about her watery eye and the pain in her lungs, and the history of her limp, till Miss Fry turned around to find the boys gone, dashing through Miss Gump's melon patch and trampling her corn, playing at pirates. It was not till weeks later that Miss Fry discovered Ethan was sneaking off in the evenings to cavort with Miss Gump's son and others. When she confronted him, he was unrepentant and had openly mocked her in Sarah's presence. Recalling her shipbred, rum-soden sons, she had no choice but to be stern with the boy, determined he'd bloom according to plan. And now, she reflected, Ethan was gone, his promise lost forever. Miss Fry marched indoors and entered the parlor, closed the curtains, and approached Tekoa. The girl was setting her dough to rise. Although Miss Fry knew there was mending to be done, she felt driven to find anything further about the Orion come to light. Rest yourself a while, said Miss Fry, and aim your eyes on the Binnacle boy. The girl sat down and no sooner looked out than Miss Bunch, Miss Mayhew, and Miss Stiggins made their way to the door. Good day, Tekoa, bubbled Miss Bunch, and good day to you, my dear Miss Fry. A day especially long for one so recently robbed of her child. Indeed, said Miss Mayhew, the very reason we felt bound to help you pass the time. Miss Fry's lip puckered. How very thoughtful. Perhaps Tekoa could be of assistance, suggested Miss Bunch. If she's free, said Miss Mayhew. Miss Dickens tapped her parasol on the floor. That justice might be done. The women seated themselves in the parlor, and Tekoa resumed her place at the window. An hour passed in silent suspense, Miss Fry's 3 guests providing the barest minimum of their promised companionship. Tell me, Tekoa, Miss Bunch spoke up, how does your precious sister fare? The same, ma'am, the girl replied. Miss Bunch shook her head and softened her voice. I've heard it said that Sarah had a sweetheart amongst the Orion crew. Simmons Sprigg, they said it was. She glanced from one pair of eyes to the next. They said the two were seen talking together, and he's the cause of the girl's affliction. Her listeners shook their heads in sympathy, then returned their attention once more to Tekoa. Patiently the girl looked out, though no one was near the Binnacle boy. She trained her gaze on the swirling swallows and watched the swifts careen through the sky. She studied a sparrow feeding its young, and suddenly noticed a figure appear, approaching the statue and seek out its ear. "What is it, Tekoa?" Miss Fry demanded. "Something spoken, ma'am, to the Binnacle boy." "Naturally, child. But what? Speak it out." Tekoa swallowed. She glanced about. Her lips quivered nervously. "He wouldn't listen. He wished to roam free, and signed himself aboard the Orion." Miss Stiggins bolted to her feet. "Quick, child, is this the same speaker as before?" Gloomily, Tekoa nodded, and Miss Stiggins' eyes blazed. "I demand to know who it is at once." Seeing the woman charging toward her, Tekoa clasped curtains shut. "Away, child," Miss Stiggins ordered, as she grabbed a curtain and flung it open. "Sarah!" she gasped. "Sarah Peel!" The others scrambled at once to the window. "Protecting her older sister she was," Miss Stiggins shouted out. "But we'll get to the truth. Believe me, we will." Snatching her parasol, she steamed out the door, with Miss Bunch and Miss Mayhew right behind her. "Tekoa, stay here and mind the bread." Miss Fry settled a stern eye on the girl. Then quickly she followed her guests out to the door, found them standing in a circle around Sarah. "So it's you," thundered Miss Stiggins. "You, who can't get a word out of your lips." "Except to the Binnacle boy," said Miss Mayhew. "A small wonder that your jaws seized shut." Miss Stiggins peered into her eyes. "With a secret like yours perched on your tongue." Sarah lowered her gaze at once and fingered her long brown hair. "Namely," Miss Stiggins proclaimed, "that it was you who murdered the Orion's crew." Sarah's eyes opened wide in terror. "You couldn't bear your sweetheart Simon Sprigg forsaking you for the sea." Miss Stiggins poked the girl's shoe with the tip of her parasol. "So you poisoned him, and his mates as well." Speechlessly, Sarah shook her head, desperately denying the charge. Her jaws trembled, her lips twitched. She labored to open her mouth and speak, noticed Miss Fry's upon her, and all of a sudden broke free. "Seize her!" Miss Stiggins screamed. Panic-stricken, Sarah dashed off, holding the hem of her skirt as she ran. "She mustn't escape," Miss Bunch cried out, and the four took after her in pursuit. Down the middle of the street they scurried, gathering the curious to their cause, and shouting for those with fleeter feet to catch the girl at once. Panting, the woman turned down an alley, and soon trailed the mob they'd called into being. Along the common, past the graveyard, through a field, they hurried along till they crossed a meadow, and at last caught up with the rest of the crowd. At a cliff. "And where's the girl?" Miss Stiggins demanded. A man turned around. "Sarah Peel, ma'am?" "Of course! And who else?" Miss Stiggins snapped. "Fell from the cliff, ma'am. Drowned, she did." Miss Stiggins gasped. Miss Fry closed her eyes. "Poor dear Sarah," she whispered. Side by side, without speaking a word, the women slowly made their way homeward. Left alone for the final block of her journey, Miss Fry cast a glance at the Binnacle boy, turned to her left, and approached his ear. Sarah spoke truly. He meant to go to sea. Not Simon Sprigg, but my Ethan. She paused for a moment. Sarah must have seen, she licked her lips and drew closer to the statue, that it was I who had poisoned the Orion's crew. Miss Fry glanced across her planting of tansy, with whose deadly leaves she destroyed her wayward son, and the corrupting crew as well. Dreamily she stared at the flowers, yellow as the noonday sun, and so failed to notice Tekoa Peel remove her gaze from her mistress's lips, take a step back from the parlor window, and hurry toward the back door. The end.